So in this section, we are going to see how to troubleshoot your EIGRP. Like first, we are going to see the connectivity, and then we'll verify the EIGRP configurations. So before that, like we did in our Ospf, if you remember, in case if you have more number of routers in general, like take an example, the router 1 LAN users is not able to communicate with the router 5 users. So there is some problem. So the problem might be in your LAN, or it can be the connectivity between router 1 and router 2, or it can be between 2 and 3, it can be between 2 and 4, 4 and 5, like that. So I always suggest you to start with accessing from any router, like let's say router 3. Just verify on the router 3 you are able to access this network or not. So divide your network into two parts, so that if this user is able to access, in that case the connectivity on the right side is perfect. So mostly likely the problem is on this side. Then you can verify from router 2, and if router 3 is able to access the resources but the router 2 is not able to access, or router 2 is not having the routing table entry for 5 network, in that case the most likely the problem is between 2 and 3. So the basic thing for troubleshooting is to identify in between which two routers the problem is. The problem might be on router 2 or maybe on router 3, not sure, but we can really figure out where the problem is. Till router 3 everything is going fine. Till router 3, from router 3 I'm able to access this network. So assume that the problem is between these two routers. So the first thing, we need to start with connectivity always. So in case if you realize that there is a problem between router 2 and 3, so assuming that this is my router 2 and router 3, so let's take an example. The first thing I'll verify is I'll verify the neighborship, and in case if the neighborship comes up, so the command I use is show IP EIGRP neighbors command, verifying the neighborship. So definitely you don't see the neighborship here. In case if you don't see the neighborship, the first thing I suggest you to check the connectivity between them. Try to ping to the connected interface on the opposite side, and make sure that the interface is up and up. If it is up, which means the connectivity is perfect, and if it is up but still not able to ping, which means maybe the IP address is wrongly configured or misconfigured, or might be there is no IP address also. So make sure that you have a connectivity between the two routers before you start verifying your EIGRP configurations. So once we feel that connectivity is perfect, the next thing we need to verify your EIGRP configurations. What can affect your neighborship between the two routers? Like router 2 and 3 is not forming the neighborship. So now we need to verify the neighborship by using a command called show IP EIGRP neighbors, so which is the general command which I use for verifying my neighborship, and the neighborship is not coming up. So there are many reasons for the neighborship not coming up. The most likely reason, the first thing we need to check is always advertisements. So make sure that this interface and this interface are properly advertised in your EIGRP. So to verify that, either you can use show IP EIGRP interfaces command, or you can also use show run section EIGRP command also, but I prefer this command show IP EIGRP interfaces, which is going to give you a lot more information and a clear basic information about the advertisements. So always start with advertisements, and once you realize that the advertisements are perfect, the next thing we need to check AS number, because if this router is advertised in AS number 100, if the other router is configured with different AS number, in that case they will not form the neighborship. So in order to form the neighborship, autonomous system number must be same on both the sides. So when you realize that both the sides it's the same AS number, the next thing, make sure that there's no authentication configured. In general, we can configure authentication in dynamic routing protocols. So if you have a misconfiguration of your authentication, or one side authentication is configured, other side is not configured, in that case also the neighborship will not come up. So I suggest you to use show keychain command. Make sure that show keychain will show you what is the password we are using, and make sure that both the sides are configured with the same password. And in case if the password is same, make sure that authentication is enabled on the interface on both the sides. So either you have a common authentication on both the sides with the correct password and configurations, or remove the authentication on both the sides. So whatever the option you feel better, you can just go with that. But authentication mismatch also one of the reason for affecting your neighborship. And one more reason for neighborship not coming up, K values. So now K values are nothing but your bandwidth delay load, MTU and reliability values. And by default these values are referred as K values, and technically we call K1 which is my bandwidth, K3 represents your delay, and the remaining values K2, K4, K5 represent the other three values like load, MTU and reliability. And the default K1 is 1 and K3 is 1. So if you know, in the basic EIGRP we learned that by default EIGRP uses only bandwidth and delay in the metric calculation, where K1 is 1, K3 is 1 and the remaining values all zeros. So now if you have a mismatch of these K values, like let's say on the router 1 or this router 2, K1 is 1 and K3 is 1, whereas remaining all are zeros. Whereas on the other side K1 is 1 and K3 is 0, which means you have a mismatch of K parameters. In that case also the neighborship will not come up. I'll show you this how to change this K values also, but I strongly recommend not to use this changing of default K values. So these are some of the possible reasons which might affect your neighborship, and if the neighborship is coming up, then definitely you should be able to see the routes. In case still if you're not able to see the routes after forming the neighborship also, then make sure that there is no ACL configured which is denying the routes entering into your routing table. That's what we call as route filtering, or maybe there's a ACL which is denying your traffic. So always try to use trace commands if you see the route in your routing tables. So let us do some practical verifications. I have a simple scenario here where I got three routers, router 1 which is connecting to router 2 here, and then router 3, and these three routers are already pre-configured with autonomous system number 100. So which means the basic advertisements I did, I'm not sure whether I did correct or not, so I did some errors on it. So there are some misconfigurations also which we are going to do troubleshooting, and also I added some more extra configurations which might affect your neighborship, or it might affect your exchange of the routes. So we are going to troubleshoot, verify them and fix them. So our main intention is to make sure that your router 1 LAN which is 10.1.1.1 must be able to communicate with 30.1.1.1 on the right side. So let's get started here. So I'm taking the console screen of the routers here. On the right side you can see the console screen of router 1, 2, 3. So the first thing I suggest you to make sure that router 2, better you go to middle router and verify that router 1, router 2 is getting the routes or not here. So I will try to verify on the router 2. You can see some messages going on here. I'm not sure what it is. I'll verify. So I'm going to give a command called show IP route. When I give show IP route, I don't see a single route here, which means there is some problem. The next thing, I'm going to verify my neighborship. With router 1 and router 2, there is no neighborship for any two routers, which means I got more issues here. As you know, I got a very simple diagram here, so I have inserted some of the issues here. So let us try to figure out what is the problem here. So first we'll try to troubleshoot the neighborship between router 1 and router 2. So the first thing I'll do is I will verify did I advertise my interfaces or not. So for that I use this command, very useful command, show IP EIGRP interfaces. And when you give this command, you will see automatically what are the interfaces you advertised. And in order to form the neighborship, the first thing we need to make sure that we advertise the WAN interfaces. So I need to advertise this S1/0 interface, S1/0 interface of both the sides. So in my diagram, I don't see any S1/0 interface, and that WAN interface is using actually my 1 network. So if I give show run section EIGRP, I should see what configurations I did. You can see I'm advertising 10 network and 11 network, but we are not using any 11 here. We are using 10 and 1. So it might be a misconfiguration here. So what I'll do is I'm going to my router EIGRP, and I was supposed to configure 1 network. I misconfigured as 11, so I'll make it as 1 network here, the WAN interface. Now you can see the neighbor adjacency has been established. Router 1 is able to form the neighborship with router 2, which means the communication between 1 and 2 is working fine. So hopefully I should be able to see the routes of router 2, which is my 20 network. But I don't see the routes of router 3, which means there is some problem might be between router 2 and router 3. So I'll go to router 2 now, and I'm going to verify my neighborship again. You can see here router 2 is forming the neighborship with only 1.1.1.1, which is my router 1. So there's no neighborship with router 3. So I will verify the neighbors advertisement show IP EIGRP interfaces. I can see S1 by 1 interface which is connecting between 2 and 3. I can see the neighborship is established. So I did the advertisements here. So probably I'll check on the router 3. Maybe on the router 3 I did not advertise. So I'll see on the router 3 S1 by 0 interface, it is advertised. But if you try to see here, AS number 200, whereas here I'm using AS number 100. So I'll show you one more command, show IP protocols. You can use one more command, show IP protocols. So I'm using EIGRP 100. In that EIGRP 100, I'm advertising my LAN interface and 2 WAN interfaces. But if I go to my router 3, so either you can use this command, you can see this interface is advertised, but it is advertised in AS number 200. Or we can use show IP protocols command, where I'm using 200 and I'm advertising my 2 dot network, which is connecting between router 2 and router 3, different AS number. So the problem here is router 1, router 2 is configured in the AS 100, whereas the router 3 is configured in the AS 200. There is a mismatch of autonomous system number. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the configurations, because as per my lab this must be in the AS 100. So I'll go to router 3 and I'll try to fix it. I'll use show run section EIGRP command to display only my EIGRP configurations, and I'm going to my router EIGRP 100. So better we remove router EIGRP 200, because anyway I'm not using it. So I'm going to remove it, and then I'm going to say router EIGRP 100, and then I'm advertising the same networks, those 2 dot network and 30 dot network in my EIGRP 100. So if I verify my interface, show IP EIGRP interfaces, now you can see the interface is advertised on both the sides and inside the AS number 100. And if I check router 2 as well, it is also advertised as 1 by 1 in AS number 100, but still there is no neighborship, and you can see the message over there. So if I give show IP EIGRP neighbors, I don't see the neighborship between 2 and 3, and you can see there is a message here, dual neighbor exchange, neighbor is down, goodbye message has been received. The reason is k value mismatch. So I did some configuration in router 2, as I said, because I just try to configure some of the issues here. We verified this as well. And authentication, anyway I'm not implementing authentication here. You know how to do if you already done CCNP route paper. So I'm not going to implement any authentication, but if mismatch of authentication also affect your neighborship. So I configured k values differently. So let me show you how to configure that. You can see the message here, k value mismatch. So I can give a command called show run. So let me show you how to change. I already changed on the router 3. So show run section EIGRP. It is already present in my EIGRP configurations. You can see this command. Okay, this command is going to show you. So we need to say router. We need to go to router mode, and there is a command starts with metric weights. And then we need to first define the type of service, which is by default 0 is supported. And then when you use question mark, you can see the k value, k1 value we need to define as 1 by default. Okay. And then k2 value by default it's 0, and k3 value is by default it's 1, and then k4 is 0, and then k5 is 0. So if you configure these values differently on the other router, in that case the neighborship will not establish. So I'm just removing this. I'm not adding this command. Let me show you where to verify. So whenever you come across these scenarios, generally we don't change these k values in the production networks, But when you use show IP protocols command, you can verify K1 is 1, K2 is 1, K3 is 1. Whereas if I check the same thing on router 2 K1 is 1, K3 is 1, remaining all zeros. So you can see the mismatch of K values on both the sides. Okay, so now there are two solutions here. Either you can make it same on both the sides, or just remove the configurations which I did on router 3. So let me show you that what I did. Show run section EIGRP. Okay, show run section EIGRP. This is what I did. If you remove it, it will go back to default values. So I'm going to use default values on both the sides. So I'll remove it, and just if you remove it, now you should see the neighborship comes up. You can see the adjacency has been established. Now the neighborship comes up between router 2 and router 3. Okay, so now I should see the route in my routing table of router 1. Still, if you don't see the route in your routing table even after forming the neighborship, make sure that you advertised your LAN interfaces and there is no ACL denying. Sometimes you may have route filtering applied which is denying the routes entering into routing table. Route filtering topic which you will see in CCNP route we discussed. And if you see the route in the routing table but still the communication is not happening, there may be an ACL applied on any of the routers which may affect your communication. So these are some of the few things which we need to keep in mind when we do troubleshooting. Let me just quickly verify here. For verifying your neighborship, so the first thing we need to verify advertisements, then AS number, and then authentication, and finally we need to check the K values.